go. Deck 78.
Hey guys, come over here and have a seat. I got some Sumerian sunsets for all of us.
Well, how
Samaria.
nice.
I thought this. I didn't think Samaria had a sun.
Well, apparently it does. It does now. So today we got a very special episode, a very special guest here on Deck 78. I'm going to give you a hint. Somewhere by night.
It's just one of those strangers that we met on the way.
It's one of those strangers we met on the way. You could call them moonlighting strangers. And we're going to talk to Scott Ryan. Scott's the author of the new book, Moonlighting, an Oral History. It's a wonderful book that I recently read. Fan of Scott's work. He did done a lot of writing on Twin Peaks, and he did The Last Days of David Letterman, a bunch of other wonderful books. But his new book on moonlighting is really something special. He got virtually everyone involved with it. And I've never seen them so candid talking about the rise and fall of the phenomena that was moonlighting, which is just such a terrific show. And unfortunately, because it's been out of circulation, a lot of people don't know it. We hope to rectify that today by having Scott join us on the show.
Indeed.
And speaking of joining us on the show, I'm so glad to see my fellow Treksperts, DAREN DOCHTERMAN and Ashley Miller are both here on Deck 78.
Howdy ho! I'm ahead of the joke.
That's lovely, Ashley. Drink your drink.
Drink your drink. So with that, out any further ado, let's have Guinan bring in Scott. Scott Ryan here.
Let's pull up a chair for him.
Pull up a chair. So here we are with Scott. Scott, I'm so happy to see you. I talked to you many moons ago for your wonderful Twin Peaks podcast about, shockingly, Twin Peaks, and that was a lot of fun. And then you've done some wonderful books, as we talked about earlier, which including The Last Days of David Letterman and a bunch of writing on Twin Peaks. But it was funny because you came out with a Moonlighting book, and I hadn't watched Moonlighting, and obviously, like most people, in a long time because it's not readily available. And I started reading. I said, "This book's really good. This is really good oral history. I better watch out." and I thought it was terrific. And then I put it aside with every intent of coming back to it. And I was on this 9 zillion hour flight to Europe, and I looked to see what I had downloaded on the Kindle. There was the Moonlighting, and I said, "Oh, I got to finish reading this." And I decided to start again from the beginning. And it was such a great book. It's such a great book. It's a great oral history. You got phenomenal access, and in fact, it made me so excited about Moonlighting again that I went. And, I did something I never do, because I don't believe in watching stuff on YouTube. Like, I don't watch stuff that people aren't being paid for, that isn't official. I don't like watching shitty quality. But I went and watched a whole mess of Moonlighting episodes because it's the only way to watch it. And I absolutely, it just rekindled my love of the show. So kudos to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I remember when you contacted me and you said, "Hey, do you want to put a blurb on your book that says you'd have to be trapped on a 9-hour flight before you'd read this?" And I said, "Yeah, could I get that on my book?" Yeah, that's exactly what I was going for.
No, it was great, because and then I didn't stop reading it, because once I got off the flight, I continued to read it. I was not until I was done with it. And obviously it's interesting because you've cultivated like a continuing association / friendship with a lot of the people you talk to, which is interesting given how honest the book is about, the whole experience of making the show.
Well, here's the thing about the Moonlighting book that I feel, and I can say this because you kind of said it yourself, that I keep telling people, like, this book is so good. And it's not because of me. It's because of the story of Moonlighting. And it's insane that no one's ever told this story before, that this story sat here for 30 years before it came out. I think it's honestly a page turner, whether, as you said, you couldn't really remember the show, or, it's not really plot based. To me, it's the story of creation. It's not like you have to know what case Dave and Maddie are working on or something.
And
like
this is
that.
a great place to take a step back, because I want to assume a lot of people are listening, don't know the show, maybe vaguely know the show. Remember, it was Siskel and Ebert's favorite movie of 1982, and realized, oh wait, that was Moonlighting with Jeremy Irons. That wasn't. That was something completely different. So I want to sort of put this in context. But before I do that, at the time, there was a lot of articles being written about the conflict on the set and how, and it was never really went into any details other than, Sybil hated Bruce hated Sybil, everybody, Sybil hated Mark Karen, all this stuff. But you actually, to your credit, sort of explain it all. Everyone's very candid, which is the joy of writing a book 30 years later, as opposed to 3 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that this book needed to wait all this time before it could be written. Now, it would have been nice if just a few years earlier we would have had Bruce. He wanted to be involved in it. Now I can talk about it from when I was doing the interviews for the book. I really couldn't, because it wasn't really out there. But
everyone knew. I mean, everyone in the business knew, but it was, nobody would talk about it, and it was a horrible thing. And now he's announced it, or the family's announced it to the world. They know the situation with Bruce, and it's so sad. And
he really did want to be a part of it, but he just couldn't. So it's heartbreaking to not have Bruce in the book, but you really do learn a lot about him through everyone else's stories.
Oh God, you feel his presence. Much like Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. Okay, so
much like watching a commercial for Seagram's Golden Wine Coolers.
Yeah,
exactly.
So tell us why Moonlighting, when it debuted in 1985, March 3rd, 1985, on ABC, was such a game changer for television, and it burned so brightly for a short period of time. And then it kind of flamed out in a sense. And I'm talking about mostly about the ratings and about the way it was perceived by the critics. But then it was still on a slow burn. People forget, like, a lot of these great shows that lasted 1 or 2 seasons. Moonlighting was on for 5 seasons.
Right.
And, and people remember they remember the brilliance of the first season, second season, and there were a lot of extenuating circumstances why the later seasons, it kind of very similar in a way to what happened with Community, where Dan Harmon gets fired and then he comes back, and just and how they had a really bad season, but then they came back and barely came back, and it was great, and then it wasn't so great, and then it was great again, and how it completely transformed television. And Moonlighting was really at the forefront of changing television in the 80s. So tell us a little bit about what the show was, why it was significant.
Well, the main thing that is hard to put in perspective now is just how straight-laced television was in 1985. I mean, it was littered with either complete nighttime soaps, where you've got your Dallas, your Dynasty, your Knots Landing. And then on the flip side were these detective shows where these people were like the most model citizens of all time, solving crimes bravely. And in walks David Addison, who has never taken anything seriously in his life. And he's like a real human, just with great writers and the best one-liners ever. And then you mix that with Sybil Shepherd, who was just strikingly beautiful and a movie star. And TV just hadn't seen that, and it was fun. And
it broke
dangerous.
The fourth wall, and it was super meta. And, it's interesting because I think I'm glad that Glenn Gordon Caron does give credit to a certain extent to Remington Steele, because Remington Steele, although it didn't push the boundaries of Moonlighting, it was, if you remember, their episodes were always alluding to noir, especially in those early seasons. It had a really great, interesting relationship with 2 stars who hated each other, Pierce and Stephanie Zimbalist. And it was it inched the medium of the sort of the Thin Man kind of derived detective show further on television.
It took that standard sort of trope and switched it around, which was excellent.
And then Moonlighting completely blew it up. But what's so fascinating, I think, is you think, okay, Glenn Caron must have watched, must have watched like Philadelphia Story and all these great Howard Hawks movies millions of times, all these great, Bring Up Baby, all these great, screwball comedies. But he didn't.
Yeah, it was Sybil.
It was Sybil who, because of course she had been with Peter Bogdanovich all those years, who knew this stuff backwards and forwards and educated Glenn about these kind of films.
Yeah, I mean, she was the one that had them screen it, and then the director of the pilot, Bob Butler, also was knowledgeable about that. And I mean, Bob Butler, like I got to interview Bob Butler. Isn't that insane?
Oh, we had the same feeling when we had Bob on the show. We're like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Amazing.
I mean, we
an icon in several decades.
Well, and I was glad to see in Quentin's new book, in that the new book that just came out, he doesn't dwell on it, but he mentions that Robert Butler was a really underrated film director too.
Yeah,
and that, and it was great to just even see that shout out to Bob, because Bob, what he did with these pilots, Moonlighting, Remington Steele, Hill Street Blues, Star Trek, obviously, is extraordinary.
Well, and it was really funny because I got Bob late in the game through Jay Daniels, and Jay said, okay, I talked to Bob, here's his phone number, you're just gonna have to cold call him, he doesn't email, just call him, he's ready for you. And I'm like, what time do I call? Whenever, just call him. And I'm like, I have to cold call like one of the greatest television directors of all times. And he was so nice. And we talked, I think he was like, I don't know, 90 or something. I mean, he's up there. Yeah. And he just said, look, I'm going to talk until I don't feel like talking anymore. And I said, whatever you can give. And honestly, we talked. And then he said, okay, I'm done. And I'm like, all right, sir, thank you. And we were done. But I mean, I got what I needed. And to have him in the book was just like incredible.
Yep. We had the same experience with him. He was so sharp as a tack and telling great stories and total energy. And then he got to the point where, okay, he's done, So totally get it. He's great in the book, obviously, has great stories about that wonderful pilot. But it's funny because the pilot only hints at the heights of the show, at how good the show will become.
Well, and I honestly don't think it's that good of a pilot, to be honest. It's definitely the worst episode in the first couple seasons, only because they don't have it down yet. It took a couple episodes for speed, and that's one of the things that Glenn kept saying. It's got to be faster. We got to do it faster. Mm-hmm. And people were thinking, are you crazy? And then also they wanted them to talk at the same time, which again, you watch TV now, it's no big deal to have two people talking at the same time. But in 1985, it was one person talks, other person answers.
Walk up to your mark, hit it, say the line. And just because that's how TV was made, and I think it's just extraordinary that was the approach that Glenn took with that show. I mean, putting aside the content, just how the show felt, was itself very different because of that.
I'm curious to hear from you guys. I assume you all watched Moonlighting, because I feel like we're all about the same age. How did Moonlighting affect you guys as creative people back then? Am I allowed to ask questions?
No, absolutely.
Questions ability.
I don't think that's allowed. What?
I was in college.
There's no fighting in the war room.
I was in college when Moonlighting was on, and I remember the reviews just being glowing, so I made a point of watching it, and I loved it. But it really wasn't until that classic episode, the Doris and Wells episode, the dream sequence always knocks twice, rings twice, that I totally fell for the show. And like everybody, I would get really frustrated, well, like most people, because you're much more charitable than I am, to the DePesto Curtis Armstrong episodes. And, like everybody would get really frustrated because the show was constantly in repeats and constantly being preempted because they couldn't keep up. Now it would be different. They would shoot 8 to 10 and it wouldn't air until they were finished. But, back then it's like they couldn't make their broadcasts. They couldn't finish in time and they couldn't get scripts delivered in time. So they were constantly being preempted or doing episodes focusing on the supporting characters, which were a lot less interesting. They were great flavors in the soup, but when they became the soup, it was not as tasty.
I can think of a movie like that.
It was like the French onion soup with only the bread, but no cheese.
It's not really soup. It's just bread now.
You're roundabout talking about Ted McGinley, aren't you? I knew it.
So, but I really enjoyed it. But, like a lot of people, I think I began to lose interest, sort of when they were treading water. And this, of course, was the time when Bruce was doing Die Hard and Sybil was pregnant and, Glenn Gordon Caron was off doing Clean Sober, and there was I kind of, it was a combination of being in college and doing other things, and just and not knowing, it was also VCR age, so you had to remember to set the VCR. This was before DVRs even, so like half the time you didn't know if it was a new episode and do I record it and whatever, so it was hard to keep up. And then there was never a great home video version. Anchor Bay did the DVD, but it was not great. So there are probably episodes I still haven't seen to this day, but yeah, I think it definitely struck a chord in me because I was always a huge fan of the screwball comedies. And in fact, I remember when we were doing Agent X, there was an episode and I just felt like we wrote to be more of a screwball comedy. And I said, I want you to watch Philadelphia Story tonight, and I want you to watch Bring Up Baby, and you'll get the kind of rhythm that we're going for. And they did, and they came back, and it was like, oh my God, these movies are crazy, incredible. Like they never heard of them, never knew they existed. And I'm like, yeah, well, okay, go. And then they started asking me, could you suggest more of these? And I'm like, and I gave them a whole list, and then I would ask them about their homework if they watched, their Howard Hawks or Frank Capra movies that weekend and everything. But anyway, I love Moonlighting, but definitely, and would read the newspapers at the time because there was no internet to kind of find out what the is going on. Why do they have no new episodes, and why are they always doing Curtis Armstrong, and what the hell is all this?
Right.
I didn't catch it on its first run. I only picked it up when it started being syndicated.
On Lifetime.
Yes, correct. And it was also at the same time when I was watching in syndication 30-something. So I would conflate them a little bit, as like one was the serious one and one was the funny one. But I enjoyed it. I liked the episodes themselves. I never liked Addison's character. I never liked him at all. I thought, believe it or not, yeah.
That's so interesting. Why would you watch it if you didn't like half of the show?
Because there's only three other shows on at the time.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, but because it was still interesting.
Wow.
And we often watch things that we don't like just to, I dare say hate watch, but right. I didn't hate the show. I thought it was live and energetic, and but I just sort of picked up on Bruce Willis's personality through the character, and I didn't enjoy him as such. Later on, I came around. Later on, I came around.
First of all, I have to say, I also wrote a book about 30-something.
I know.
Awesome.
I'm laughing.
I have a 30-something oral history. That was my first TV book, and I love 30-something. And
I did too.
I don't want to cause any trouble, but I would say 30-something is probably a better show than Moonlighting.
Is it though?
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, because
I would make the fight that 30-something could be the best show ever.
The depth of their bench was stronger.
That's true. And I think, look, the great strength of 30-something, it's like somebody said, the reason why shows about 20-somethings never work is because there are no stakes when you're 20 years old.
Yeah.
You haven't married anybody, you don't have a family, you don't have a house. Like there is literally nothing that you can't let go of. And that's why 30-something worked and the other stuff didn't.
Well, my favorite joke about 30-something at the time was that, look, if you're so upset about not being able to communicate with people, the least you can do is shut the hell up.
That's great. But I mean, to me, like Moonlighting I loved that show. And that show to me was a revelation because of the dialogue, because of the snap, because of the relationship between those characters. I'd never seen anything like it. Contra Darren, I love David S.
Yeah,
It's like, that's the guy I wanted to be. I wanted to be like that quick, like that snappy. And I got into screwball comedies backwards, the way that Mark was describing the people he worked with on Agent X. Like when I saw His Girl Friday for the first time, I went, wait a minute, that's just like Moonlighting. Which is an idiotic thing to say, although it's also true.
We did that on Free Enterprise too. We actually introduced a few people to screwball comedies to try and get the pace of the dialogue up, and
not naming any names.
Quicker. Well, yeah, some people some people like, Eric McCormick already knew the screwball comedies, and they, took to it like a fish to water, and they were thrilled to have that. Other people less so. So characters based on Mark got it, and characters based on other characters maybe didn't. But it was really I just love screwball comedies, and that's why I thought the fact that this was, because if Remington Steele was the Thin Man, then kind of this was Moonlighting was, it was Philadelphia, but it had, the big sleep in it too. I mean, it had, had all that. So, all movies that I loved. And I loved, obviously, Bruce Willis, because he would say or do anything. And obviously a real, New Yorker, he was discovered at a bar.
That's why.
We didn't like him.
And,
discovered
Sybil, I first of all, I love my cool Hitchcock blondes, but she was also crazy, crazy funny. And it was, the fact that, she was so versatile and so interesting and so knowledgeable about movies, and just, I loved her. So it's like, I love both of them. So I was always kind of rooting for both of them. And it was interesting because obviously this is kind of the era of the will they or won't they, because Cheers had the will they or won't they, and Moonlighting had the will or the won't they, and it's sort of, and following Remington Steele, which had, everybody was will they or won't they, which was and Moonlighting had an interesting way of dealing with it. They did, and a lot of people say that's when it jumped the shark. Right. But you really got to look at it and question that, because they did some great episodes after that as well.
Well, and that was, there were two main things that made me want to do this book. One was, I never understood why no other show was as creative as Moonlighting. And you mentioned Community, and I would say that's the closest.
Yeah.
And then now I would say Atlanta is certainly creative, but not in that way that Moonlighting was, where they just really, like, you never knew what to expect. And then the second thing was something that you just mentioned and went out of my head that fast. Oh, no, it was like the idea that them getting together ruined the whole show. Mm-hmm. And as a writer, that was interesting to me, that decision. And I wanted to have that discussion, like, why did all this happen? And you learn in the book, they had no choice. It wasn't really a decision. Glenn had something crazy, like 3 days to make the decision, because Bruce was leaving to do Die Hard. Mm-hmm. And he was going to be gone, and Sybil was going to be done for and put on bed rest. And he's got pregnant with twins. Yeah, she finds out she has twins, and she's got a month to film, but Bruce has days, and they do that. They have to do a season finale, and he's got moments to make a decision. And that was never covered in the press. Nobody was taught, TV wasn't looked at this way. Now we would have all that information on Twitter, although we wouldn't know if we should believe it if it had a blue check mark or not.
Well, and also, right, and then Mark Harmon, they only had him for a couple episodes because he was leaving to go.
Right, yes, something. He had a heart out as well, and they have to make this decision, and then they have to live with it for an entire season. And that is, to me as a writer, that's my favorite part of the book, and to me when the book really takes off, because you want to blame and say, oh, it's because they had sex, but that has nothing really to do with it. If they wouldn't have had sex in that episode, Sybil still would have been on bed rest. Bruce is still going to make Die Hard. Glenn's still going to make Clean and Sober. And now they would have never had sex.
But I think there is something to that, and it's not that the show got worse. It's not that there weren't good episodes that followed all of that. I think that there was a central tension that was part of the show's engine that drove it forward, and I think it was even more complex than will they, won't they. I think it was what was sitting underneath between them, and that there was a hope that the audience was carrying with them, that something would be consummated, but also this fear. And the moment that it happened, like, the hope dissipates by definition, that fear dissipates by definition, because now it's in the rearview mirror. And is great as the dialogue remained. And again, I think there were some really great episodes that followed that. Like, it didn't have the same energy. The energy of it changed. Its identity changed. And those other things, I think, probably fed into it. But look, I mean, the decision to do something like that, I mean, you think about how difficult it is to make television, right? It's like one of my actors on Andromeda once said to me, it's like, Ashley, we don't shoot pages, we shoot days. And, as a showrunner, you find yourself in a position where you have to make decisions and not necessarily know if they're going to work. And you just have to put your faith in what's going to come next. It's a little bit like, I think, being, a quarterback in the NFL, not like Pop Warner, not high school, none of that, not college, but like the NFL, in the championships. And sometimes you just have to put the ball in the air and trust your receivers, because that's the only choice you have. And to me, I feel like that was the position that Glenn was in. And look, why shouldn't he be confident? He's a terrific writer. And Moonlighting was his sketch pad. It's like, you look what he did afterwards. You look at just kind of the interesting choices that he makes in the shows that he does after that. And even now and again, never quite hit, the weirdness level of Moonlighting, although occasionally it got pretty weird. But I think Moonlighting was his laboratory. It's where he experimented with story and with storytelling. And
but it's amazing that he had the latitude to do that.
Yes.
Because, he could literally, they would shut down because they didn't have scripts, and they would indulge him. And that was because obviously the ratings and then later the Emmys. But to have that kind of luxury where, and then they would go days and days over schedule. And these scripts were what we said, there were 60, 70 page scripts, right? Oof. I mean, they're huge.
I think they were 120.
Yeah, 120 for 50 minutes of television. That's incredible because people talk so quickly. And then, of course, there's, deleted scenes as well. I mean, it's remarkable.
So I have about your thing about like moving up. Has everyone seen Twin Peaks?
Mm-hmm, sure,
I've heard of it.
That's the show about the mountains.
Yeah. I mean, in some way or another. But David Lynch now says that he was forced to say who did it. And, I don't ever remember hearing that back in the 90s, but that's the story we're told now.
Right.
And people now say, oh, well, once they said who did it, the show was no good. And
which is bullshit.
Right.
I agree with that.
But you had to tell who did it, because that was the whole thing. If we didn't have what I call episodes 14, 15, and 16 of Twin Peaks, the show would be nothing. You needed to have that, because that makes it a grown-up thing. I have a mystery, I solve the mystery, that's storytelling. And one of the things Glenn says that I think is so true is that here are two adult people who are amazingly good looking. It's unbelievable they're never going to have sex. And he didn't want to tell that story. Mm-hmm. And I like that. Like, I hate that on Bones, 400 episodes and they can't get together. I didn't give a shit that Ross and Rachel got together in this series finale. I cared in season 1 and I didn't care anymore. Tell me a grown-up story.
Scott, I think for some people, though, it was also the way they got together. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just that they got together, because, you could argue that she wasn't initially complicit, that it's not.
Nobody said that. You're right. The writers say that now, but I think that's looking back. Do you really think that anyone thought that back in?
I don't. But it's like you said about Twin Peaks. I think there's a lot revisionist
right
commentary, because I it's true about Twin Peaks. Yeah, they struggled with that nonsense, that noir plot with James Marshall and the widow and all that shit.
Right.
But the Wyndham Earle stuff was fantastic.
It's some of the best episodes.
Yeah, and people were tuning out by the droves because they hadn't answered who killed Laura Palmer. Everyone wanted to know. It was the first question everybody. In fact, you could argue they waited too long to answer that question.
Yeah.
And that they were spinning plates too long.
Yeah.
But I mean, and it's a brilliant episode. I mean, the reveal.
It's incredible. I mean, one of the best episodes ever.
So I have a problem with people say it's people who just parrot the conventional wisdom, and it's the same thing with Moonlighting. You see people parroting the conventional wisdom. Everyone now does the musical episode. That's we're doing out of the
Lord, we did it on Fringe, and I
Strange New Worlds is doing a crossover with the animated series, like whatever that is, and but I mean, you look at something as great as the noir episode is, and it truly is amazing. I mean, and getting Orson Welles days before he dies to do the introduction.
Now that's casting.
Oh my God. And Sybil says to Tim, come do this. And he comes and does the introduction, which is remarkable.
He used to sleep on her couch. So
yeah, exactly. So he kind of owed her. And he's great in it. He's great in it. And I love reading in your book how everyone's just in awe. How they're just in awe of Orson Welles and what a big deal it is, which is great. But then, Atomic Shakespeare is even better.
Sure. That episode is certainly one of the best episodes of television ever, and at the time was the most expensive episode of television ever.
And people don't really talk about it, which is the tragedy of the show not being available. And I know that Glenn has hinted recently that ABC or Disney is working on rectifying that, because of course it is the product of the many shows from the 80s that suffered that the music rights weren't cleared for home video and this dimension and all other dimensions for all time and beyond the end of the earth. But it was something that hurt obviously Wise Guy, a lot of other shows, Wonder Years, and it's hopefully. And Glenn Gordon Caron always said he would not allow them to replace the music. To his credit, would not allow. And there's the Beatles are in there, and the Rolling Stones are in there, and so if this happens, it'll be amazing. But the streaming economics have made it possible. And I mean, the day this shows up on Hulu, won't that be a wonderful thing?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is it'll be on Disney Plus because Disney owns it.
Yeah, but they own Hulu too, and I think Disney Plus is a little too. It is a little more adult, it's like, I don't know if it would be on Disney Plus. I feel like Hulu would be the right place for them, but who knows, wherever it is,
I'll certainly be happy, because everything I cover, 30 something Moonlighting, Letterman, it doesn't stream. My wife begs me, could you do Walking Dead or something people watch? And I'm like, no, I'm looking for a show that no one cares about and everyone has forgotten
that's so
about.
funny. I have the
no streaming.
Our publisher comes to us and they put, it's like, or Ed comes to me with these things. I'm like, no, it's not going to make any money. I'm not interested in doing something. But don't you love the show? I said, yeah, but I'm not writing a show about a show I love that 6 people are going to read. And it's like, I'm like, and the publishers come to us with stuff like
money.
Yeah, they come. Oh, you guys want to do Yellowstone? It's like, no, I don't. Thank you.
Yeah.
But
I mean, what are you going to do? I do what I love and what I have a question about. That's to me what sends me on the way. I want to figure something out and then hope you can get the thing, the contacts. And, I worked a long time to get Glenn to say yes. I actually asked him after my 30-something book and I didn't hear anything, but then I did the Letterman book. And I sent him the Letterman book, and that certainly really helped, because
isn't that the fun? I when we're doing the show, I talk about it being like Trek archaeology, but doing the books, I feel it's like I have these questions that I want to answer. The only way to get the answers is to do these books, and now the podcast to a certain extent. But I love that you say that about Moonlighting. You have all these questions that you don't have answers to, so you write a book to have access to all these people to tell you the answers. What are some of the things that most surprised you? That you learned, or the answers that you got in writing the book that you didn't know about?
Well, for me, the main thing is how little prying I did. Like I would have to say something as hard hitting as hi, and then they would start spilling immediately. I
As
mean,
if
I'm not kidding.
The tap was under so much pressure after all these years that
Like,
they had to
were
let it
just
out.
dying for someone to ask them. I mean, there was a person that I interviewed that like before he even knew that like I have morals and like I'm have good intentions, was like spilling dirt to me before I could hit record almost, you know. And that's really not my style. Like I'm not out to take anyone down. I don't work on something for a year to like say nasty things about people. But I mean, they just wanted to talk. They had the goods and they wanted to spill them. And so to me, that's the thing about the story that works. And I always made sure that two people talked about it. But the most like stark thing for me was the interview with Alan Arkish, who was a director. He directed the most hours of Moonlighting and is, you know, did Ally McBeal, Fame, you know, a million shows. He wanted to Zoom and told just the greatest stories, laughing, having a great time. We got up to, he directed the episode where Dave and Maddie had sex. At the end of that episode, he said, look, we had talked for 2.5 hours. He said, I have a meeting. Can I call you back in 3 hours? And I said, yep, we'll take a little break. When he called back, and then we talked about season 4, and after that, he never smiled. His face browed. He was hunched over. He was angry.
He had PTSD.
Yes. And it isn't just that viewers view that moment. It was all of them. It's like they all got eaten alive at that point. And that's when I knew, like, that's what broke the book for me. And I was like, oh, we got a real story to tell. There's something that happens. Before that, Bruce was so happy to be discovered, but then he gets diehard and he changes. And then Sybil watches that explosion and that anger just goes everywhere. It comes through every part of everything. And you could see it in their face. And to me, that was so fascinating. That's right at that moment.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I thought you did a very nuanced job of dealing with the Rashomon of it all, because it's very easy to say, oh, this was all on Sybil, right? But it doesn't come across that way, you know, or it's all Bruce, you know, it doesn't come. And then, you know, look, I know people who work with Glenn on other shows who don't all have the greatest things to say about him either. You could say, oh, well, maybe it was Glenn, but it wasn't. It was like they all, you know, did, well, they're human, you know, they all did great things and they all did terrible things. And there's no one person you could point to as being the one who was responsible for the sort of, to use a word they use now, toxic atmosphere. And it wasn't, you know, but I mean,
I think it was toxic. I think it actually was toxic. It's just there wasn't a word for it. But the example I like to give, because I always like to say everything I learned in life, I learned at Arby's. Arby's was my first job when I was 16 and I ran that drive-through. And when you are running that drive-through and the cars are backed up and you need your curly fries and you got a guy here that wants the Arby's sauce, you start yelling, hey, I need that, get that. And you know, the person making the sandwiches starts yelling at you. And that's just running the drive-thru at Arby's. Yeah. Now imagine doing a show that is behind schedule. There's no script every day. You got those monologues. What's Sybil? And I feel like a couple people, the directors and a couple writers say, like, what Bruce and Sybil were put through was ridiculous. And also Curtis Armstrong and Elise Beasley, like they were all getting these big paragraphs and you got to do it in a second because you're behind. Yeah. It was a pressure cooker. Nobody is going to behave in that situation.
Yeah, and it's funny reading Elise because she really sounds like she would love to still be doing this today. Like she would have been happy if the show went 25 seasons.
Yeah.
You know, everybody else is like, okay, it's done, and you know, it's probably the best. And she just like, you could tell she misses it so much. And Curtis is a delight, obviously, and he's a writer and he's an interesting guy.
Oh, and just so nice and so reserved. And like, I didn't expect that because, you know, you think of him from Revenge of the Nerds or anything you've ever
Risky
seen.
Business.
you know, all of his sitcom appearances, and he was so smart and soft-spoken and just like, and you know, just nothing like Herbert Viola at all. But such a great guy.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you guys, do you have a favorite episode of Moonlighting when you think back? I mean, is there one that is your favorite? You know, starting with you, Scott. I mean, or do you look at it as one big canvas?
No, I definitely do. I have two. I mean, Big Man on Mulberry Street to me is a revelation, and that was the musical episode. They do a 6-minute dance thing, like
directed by Stanley Donen.
Yeah,
that's incredible. It was Sandal Bergman right after Conan.
And Sandal Bergman kept calling me kiddo. And she actually butt dialed me a bunch of times. And then she would just talk to me and like, and you're like, I'm talking to someone from Xanadu. Are you kidding me?
I'm so upset I didn't call you because we could not track her down for the 1982 documentary. She's one of the people we couldn't get from Conan. Just couldn't find her. I asked everybody, and we were trying to find an agent for her and everything. And if only I had reached out to you, we could have.
Or she might have butt dialed you.
Phone. Yeah,
changed everything.
And I loved her calling me kiddo. But so that is one of my favorites. But I always pick the season 5 premiere. And it's pretty funny that I'm not going to come up with that title of the episode, which really is my favorite episode.
But tell people why. Obviously, you talked about the dance number at Big Man on Mulberry Street, but there's such an interesting story behind that. The Billy Joel song, of course, but also the story, the reveal in that episode about David. I mean, it's so if you can just explain, because again, unlike Star Trek, where we sort of assume that people have a certain level of knowledge about what we're talking about, Moonlighting, this may come as, you know, or people may not have watched in 30 years and not read your book, so they don't know. So
they haven't been.
Well, they will after this podcast.
I mean,
they will.
Does nobody take a 9-hour plane ride anymore? I mean, like, and you get trapped on there, and you know, I gotta this is driving me crazy that I can't think of the title of my favorite episode. So talk amongst yourselves. A Womb with a View, which I knew all along. I knew that. I wrote a book about moonlighting. I think I know the title.
So we've heard.
A Womb with a View is my favorite episode, but that's the season 5 premiere. But you want me to go back to Big Man. Here's the thing. And yeah, it's funny because you want me to spoil the ending. The show.
I mean, when are people going to watch this show?
It's going to stream on Hulu. You called it. It's coming on Hulu.
Okay, so tee it up without revealing the ending, okay?
So the point of this is someone dies in New York, and David has to head back to New York. Maddie, of course, is really jealous, and you find out a major reveal about David Addison that I cannot spoil. It's just in my nature. I can't spoil it. If we were talking about 30 something, I couldn't give the spoiler that happens in season 4. I just can't do it. But the idea is it's something
it's
that
people
in
Soylent David.
It's something that now in a TV show would be no big deal. But at that time, it was just completely shocking. And it changes how you look at David Addison. You know, some people I heard even watched that show and didn't like David Addison.
Wow.
And, I mean, I've heard it. It's rare.
Very rare.
This actually turns everything you learned about his sexism, his comments, and it really informs his character. And so watch Big Man on Mulberry Street, but I can't spoil it, but I'm sorry. It's just in my nature.
The other thing I think was so interesting is that what comes across your book is how much Sybil and Bruce loved the show. Because, you know, at the time, you get a sense that they wanted to be anywhere else and that they were really done with it and really didn't have a great deal of love for it. And that you see now, you know, how much they truly loved the show and how much it meant to them. And you also reminded me about all those wonderful interstitials, or particularly like the where they make these sort of snarky meta things about not having new episodes that they would film,
right?
And the beginning of the episodes where they'd have all this really self-reflexive, you know, comments about, you know, episodes that were coming up or weren't airing, not getting the Emmy, not winning Emmys, and just amazing. I mean, nobody was doing stuff like this,
and nobody really has since, which is strange to me. Like, someone needs to steal this idea, and maybe it wouldn't work as well today. But the thing that was cool is it isn't Bruce and Sybil doing these things. It's David Addison and Maddie Hayes introducing the episode or talking about next week. And that is so very meta that it's crazy. They knew they were television characters. And that is something that, yes, I think Boston Legal did a little bit of looking at the camera and things like that. But it's not so much where these were characters that knew they were TV characters. And I think
Dan Harmon in Community, when you would have an episode like the paintball episode, where suddenly you do a Western, or you're doing Star Wars, or, you're doing the stop motion animation episode, for Christmas. And so, I mean, there were definitely, he was pushing the force, showing how elastic the format could be in a way that I don't think had been done since Glenn did it.
7 seasons in a movie.
And now it's happening. 6 seasons of a movie. So, what you have a favorite episode of Moonlighting?
Easy, hands down. Atomic Shakespeare. I mean, that blew my honking mind, man. Like, just you talk about meta. Like, first of all, suck on that, St. Elsewhere. But the being in that world and feeling like, wow, it's like, I don't know. I had never engaged with a television show, with a story in a television show on that level before, in the sense that, I mean, and just so that everybody understands, it's the point of view on that episode is a kid who has to do his homework, and he is imagining David and Maddie and the cast of his favorite show, and they are all doing Taming of the Shrew.
And then John Goodman comes in and demands the homework.
That's right. Then it's like you're suddenly in Now and Again episode. That blew my brain out the back of my skull, man. And it was funny, as it always is. The funny thing is, at this point in time, I didn't appreciate screwball comedy, and I didn't appreciate Shakespeare. Later on in life, obviously, I would come to appreciate both. But in the context of watching this episode, man, it was like, first of all, teenage boy doesn't want to do his fucking homework. That's me. I'm in. Secondly, like, oh yeah, if it were like my favorite characters from my favorite show doing this, that would be great. It was delightful to me.
And that is the lowest rated episode of season 3 that has Dave and Maddie in it.
That's amazing.
As soon as they saw Shakespeare, they were out of there.
They were out.
Shakespeare guy.
Doesn't that just tell you everything you need to know about television audiences?
Yeah. It tells me that not much has changed.
Yeah.
So, Darren, what about you?
I did enjoy the noir episode, even more than the fact that Orson Welles was narrating.
Doppelganger.
I liked the fact that it was such a change from the regular show, and that they were being very brave with it, and I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm sort of drawn to like saying, oh, maybe it was I should go with a regular episode of the show rather than one that broke format. But I just love the dream sequence. I love the dream sequence always rings twice, just because I love seeing it from the two perspectives that are so different. I love how they refused to shoot in color and then desaturated the black and white, that they actually shot in black and white because they knew the network would air it in color if they didn't. I love that, Orson Welles' introduction is so great. There's nothing wrong with your television. In 15 minutes, it will turn to black and white. And that's okay. And it's so great. And the, everything about that episode is so terrific. But there's so many great episodes, and even the bad episodes always have something clever in them. So, but it definitely is one of these shows where it's all over the map. I mean, there's brilliance, and then there's less brilliance, and some great guest stars, and it changed the medium. And I love, obviously casting Eva Marie Saint as Maddie's mom, even if those episodes weren't great. Just so many great things about the show, and about how it said this medium can do incredible things. I mean, I think the TV shows that we're always drawn to are the ones that broke new ground, whether it be Star Trek in '66 or Moonlighting. To me, obviously, Wise Guy was another show in the era that said, oh, serialized storytelling, these arcs. I mean, that was groundbreaking at the time, and I love that. So Twilight Zone is a show we all love that was so all these shows that are remarkably groundbreaking. So Scott, you did the Lord's work with this book. It's phenomenal. I encourage people to either get the soft cover or the Kindle version, and they can do that on Amazon, or they can buy it directly from your publisher, which is
definitely from me. You want to go to scottryanproductions.com, or that's probably the easiest, and I can sign it for you. The book is in full color, amazing pictures on great paper, and I do own the publishing company, and we were working on getting a distributor, and the guy on the phone said, well, I'm looking at your books. Did you do a book on moonlighting? No one cares about moonlighting. And I thought, maybe before you say that, look at who wrote it. Yeah. Also, maybe don't be on the call with that guy. But he also said, why would you waste money doing it on good paper and in color? Nobody's doing that. Just do it print on demand. And I said, oh, because we actually love what we do and we want it to be beautiful. And we're not going with you, but thank you.
And you got a lot of love for that book too. I mean, you got a lot of great reviews. I imagine it sold pretty well. I mean, because there's no other book on the subject.
There is And, like I said, it's an actual good story. It's not just some nostalgic go through, especially if you're into television. I'm sure all of you guys, you read these stories and you're like, that is no TV show would get away with that.
Yeah. I mean, we only scratched the surface of the stories that you unearth and some of the stuff where, I mean, I literally on the plane would go, oh my God, it's like I could, especially, I mean, it takes on a whole new level for those.
I remember the stewardess kept coming up to you and said, hey, keep it down. You must be reading that Moonlighting book. Exactly. Everyone on the plane's reading it.
That was during hour 6.
We're going to have you back to talk about Twin Peaks, because of course you've written prolifically on that subject as well.
Thank you. And I just finished today. I put the finishing touches on my next book, which is about David Lynch's Lost Highway. Awesome. The whole book is done except
it's the last days of David Lynch. So you're combining the Letterman book with the David Lynch book.
David Lynch, but I'm just waiting on the Bill Pullman interview. But the whole book is done, designed, and ready to go. But Bill Pullman, just like Bruce, is saying yes, no, yes, no. Hopefully he's fine though. Boy, I wish I wouldn't have said just like Bruce. Now,
if I had a dime every time I heard we're just waiting on the Bill Pullman interview, I'd be rich.
Right.
But I can't let you guys let me go without. I need to talk about Star Trek. Okay.
Oh, geez, that thing.
All right.
If you must.
Now,
what's that?
I am rewatching the Rick Berman era of Star Trek. So I'm doing Next Generation.
Okay.
Now I'm going into Deep Space Nine, and I'm watching them as you're supposed to. Now, I don't want you to spoil anything for Deep Space Nine, but I just finished season 2.
But we can spoil David Addison, though.
Yeah. No. There's no spoilers. But I don't understand Deep Space Nine. What were they thinking in the first 2 seasons? The first season is all Murder, She Wrote. Every episode is Murder, She Wrote. And then the second season is I take the runabout, I crash it, I get kidnapped, and I don't tell anyone where I'm going. Now, I should stick with Deep Space Nine, right?
You should 100% stick with Deep Space Nine.
110% stick with Deep Space Nine.
Okay, but the first 2 seasons
will not regret it.
Well, in the first season, they had Angela Lansbury, and they knew they had to use her.
I mean, Michael Piller is a genius, and he's written most of these episodes, and I'm just
I promise you, if you and it really it's strange, it's because it's a little bit like Next Generation. And I think there are great episodes in the first 2 seasons, but in the third season is really when it finds its voice.
That is very true.
Just like TOS.
Yeah, exactly. Well, whoops, except in reverse. But if you stick with it, it will reward you richly, and you will look back on everything sort of previous to that, I think like in a different light. Like I think
Plus, you still got the benefit of episodes like Duet and The Hands of the Prophets. I mean, there's still some really progress.
Well, definitely when they do the religious Bajoran stuff. And here's the thing I think is fascinating. Like Ducat and Garrick, is he the Taylor? Those two actors and those characters come alive.
Yeah.
You realize the same thing they did.
Yes.
When they were writing it, they didn't know.
But it's been
Garrick was a one-off.
I've watched 52 episodes.
Yeah.
And
I think part of the
generation that was brilliant.
Part of the problem is that
that's what I need to know.
Avery Brooks was bored. And then you see the moment in the show where he's not bored anymore.
Yeah. There is literally a moment. Yeah. It actually happens on screen. Yeah. It's like it's pretty fantastic.
Okay, because
you also have Louise Fletcher and Frank Langella who are great in that section.
It's just a great
so it's not without its moments.
To me, I am all about the guest stars. The cast, I'm just not bonding.
Michael made a big. I'm going to give you a little piece of Trek information.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
The Trexpert is going to give you his wisdom with you.
Thank you.
So Michael made a very big mistake with Deep Space Nine. They decided, okay, we're going to put all our money, all our eggs into this super pilot that they spent a lot of money on. And now what we're going to do is do a bunch of smaller shows to make up for having spent all this money on the pilot. But that's okay because the show takes place on a space station. So it's okay if we do a bunch of really small shows. We don't need to, we want to show people that this isn't necessarily about boldly going. This is about boldly staying, right?
Right. Big
mistake. You can't suddenly go from this epic pilot to these tiny little episodes and expect people to get what you're doing.
Unless you bring the bigger world into the station.
Yeah, and it took a while for them to really understand what the show was. And the other key is, you know how Star Trek is transformed when Gene Coon comes on the original Star Trek?
Right.
When Ira Bear comes over and starts to run, Michael starts to go over to
season 2. You're right. Ira, he writes some great Next Generation.
But wait until he's the showrunner because Michael goes off to do Legend and Voyager.
By third season,
Ira Bear is running it. Transformative.
Yeah. You have a slugger's row in there. You have Ira, you have Ron Moore, you have Renee Chavarria, you have Robert Wolf, you have like Hans Beimler, you have like these guys who were just like, giants.
They're going to come over your
Renee Echevarria,
who also was on Medium with and on Now and Again with Glenn. So it's just
when Ron and Renee come over, it's transformative. Ron comes over, Renee Echevarria comes over, and they know how to write character. But if you don't watch season 4, 5, and 6 and think that this show is something special, then we've misled you. But I can't imagine someone with your taste, is not going to watch season 4, 5, and 6 of Deep Space Nine.
No, I've
something wonderful
to watching all of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, which I've never seen. I love the Next Generation.
If they can't all be winners, but honestly, when you get into the third season, you will absolutely detect the difference.
Okay, because that's what I'm up to. I'm up to this third season premiere.
When you're into the fourth season, it's a whole new ballgame. It's like, now the shakedown cruise is over in terms of what Ira is doing in that show, and it just cooks.
All right. And that's when they get more serialized, and that changes the ballgame too.
Yeah.
And then you got to watch Voyager, and then
that happens. And that's
so
it's on TV.
Okay, I'm gonna try because I'm not a big fan of Discovery or Picard because to me it's not Star Trek. I feel like people, and I don't know, you guys can stop me if I'm not allowed to say this.
No, keep going,
people. But here's what I think happens. Someone goes in and they're like, I'd like to write Star Trek. I'd like to do this show. And then they're like, oh, we're going to give it to you. And he's like, the thing is, I don't really like Klingons. And I don't like how they all work together. And I don't like anything. I want to really do Star Wars, or I want to really do Battlestar. So it's just not my Star Trek. That's how I feel about this new one. So I thought I'm going to go back and do all of these because I love the Next Generation. I think and watching it again, it's so amazing.
It's so funny you say that because I like Next Generation. I'm a big fan of Next Gen. It's my third favorite Star Trek series.
Oh, what are 1 and 2, if you don't mind?
Well, the original and then Deep Space Nine and then Next Gen. But I really like Next Gen. And I was watching Pluto TV, as Darren knows. I got my COVID shot and my flu shot, and I was laid up all weekend because I'm a wimp recovering from all that. And so, I couldn't concentrate. So I turned on Pluto TV, where they just have the Star Trek
based on my recommendation.
Yes, of course. Yeah, based on your recommendation, of course. So I'm watching, and it's so funny because they had a bunch of original Star Treks on. I'm literally, 1 second I can tell you what the episode was. 1 second.
Isn't that fun?
Next Generation, boom, 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 boom. They get to an episode. I had no idea what the episode was. I'm like, did they just make this and add this to the rotation? It was this thing called Inheritance from 7th season, where Data meets Dr. Soong's wife or something, and I'm like, I mean, I
never
know I've
seen this
it,
before,
but I'm like, how did this slide in? Like, is somebody like making new episodes of Next Generation? Is that telling me? Because I don't remember this episode at all.
Yes, we were all sworn to secrecy, Mark.
And I was sure
don't tell them it's like the Truman Show, but
it would start to come back to me because I've written a few words about Star Trek.
You have,
and it was
one
like
or two.
I had no idea what the fuck it was. I didn't remember it. I didn't know what was going on. I literally was completely.
Was it like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? Except it was Star Trek.
Yeah, it was like a race from my mind.
Just blame it on the booster.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing to us now. I'm
like, what is this?
Get that booster shot.
I
blame it on the booster. Was an abandoned episode of.
It's going to be funny because I'm going to go back and find a Cinefantastic where I reviewed it and wrote about it.
And you gave it 3.5 stars.
And I'm going to be like,
I will never forget
the first. The first paragraph was, "I doubt I'm going to remember this in the future."
And it was just like bizarre. I mean, I've never had that. I mean, there are episodes I vaguely, I don't really remember what happened in the episode or whatever. I do not remember this episode at all. That it was an episode. I don't remember an episode with that title. I don't remember anything about it. It was that memorable.
I always have told my wife, if I ever get Alzheimer's, make me watch Twin Peaks again right away. I would love to go down Twin Peaks and not remember something, or if I start forgetting things, I want that to happen to me.
I felt that way the first time I saw it.
Jeez. Well, we'll just have the Vulcan. We'll do forget. Okay. Well, you got to ask your Star Trek question. You happy now?
Yeah, thank you. That does help because I thought I just need to understand because everybody, I keep saying, everyone's like Deep Space Nine, it's so good. And I'm like, I'm watching it. I've seen the beginning many times. I just never made it this far.
Yeah.
But it's been a struggle. The first 2 seasons, I got to admit,
understandable
for me.
I just want to tell our audience,
yeah, I'm
a huge fan of Scott's books. They're terrific. And I'm not just saying it because he writes about things I would never write about, so we're not competing. But
because they don't make money. He knows I don't make money.
No, but Scott, seriously, Scott's books. I read a lot of his Twin Peaks work. I got to read the Letterman book. I've been meaning to read that, the Next Flight, and the Moonlighting book is sensational. And really, you owe it to yourself to pick up these books. They will be a revelation. So I'm so glad that we had you on the show and to talk about Moonlighting. And if all goes well, let's hope we'll be watching these episodes in pristine high def in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me on and for all your kind words and for helping. I always wanted to be like that bag of peanuts that were given out on an airplane. And now I kind of am.
Me too. I've always wanted to touch people and put them into anaphylactic shock.
Yeah.
That would be a great superpower.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And well, that's the character name, anaphylactic.
Did the Beastie Boys record a song? Anaphylactic. Oh no, it was Intergalactic.
Oh my God.
It wasn't Inheritance. I know that. That was the Next Generation. That was Finola Flanagan and Data. Man, the 7th season was really bad. I can't even remember it. So anyway,
but okay. I want to forget Sub Rosa, where Beverly's
this was right
in a romantic...
before Sub Rosa, I guess. Ooh. Sub Rosa, I remember sadly, but Inheritance, I do not remember at all. So anyway, Scott, it's so great having you, and we'll have you back to talk about Twin Peaks in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And by all means, everyone who loves Deep Space Nine, please do not tweet me and tell me that I'm wrong. I'm on the path.
Okay.
I'm just asking questions. So thank you.
Great talking with you,
Scott. Yeah.
And that's why you subscribe to Deck 78, because if you want I mean, this was supposed to be Trek adjacent, and then suddenly it became Trek. I don't know what happened. Something went terribly wrong.
Sometimes you pivot.
Sometimes you pivot.
There was a little bit of adjacency there. I mean, he asked about Deep Space Nine. Renee was on Deep Space Nine. Renee worked for Glenn on Down Again, and Glenn created and ran Moonlighting. It's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whoever the hell that guy is.
We gotta have Renee on the show. I'm such a fan of Renee's writing, and he doesn't get the attention that people like Ron and Brannon get, and even Maritn having done The Expanse, and boy, Renee was a rock star on that staff, and we gotta have him on the show. But Scott was a great guest. He did a great. I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. This book on Moonlighting is terrific. If you have any interest in Moonlighting, you got to pick it up. And then I'm looking forward to his next project as well. He's a really talented writer, and I'm glad that he's like Ed Gross. He reminds me of Ed Gross because Ed's so interested in writing about anything he's passionate about. Like, right. No matter, if there are 10 people interested, he doesn't care because he's just going to write it. He's writing a bunch of books recently. People said, what are you guys doing next? I'm not doing anything. Ed's writing a bunch of books about stuff that I had no interest in.
Ed's unstoppable. You can't stop the guy.
You can't be bargained with. He can't be reasoned with.
No, he is. He's definitely the Terminator of journalism. But this is
the journalator.
The journalator.
Exactly. Wait, no. Yeah.
But that's what I love about this Deck 78, where we can, dive into any subjects that we want, that we don't have to be constrained by being Trek.
That's one of the reasons why we got the secret password to get on the deck, so that we could open up the Vista, if you will.
Yeah, and if you want to be a part of Deck 78, you can join us at Treksperts Plus. Treksperts Plus, by being a Treksperts Plus subscriber, you can enjoy every episode of Deck 78, along with some special surprises for our Treksperts Plus subscribers. And we hope you'll be joining us throughout 2023 as we embark on our Inglorious Live 2023 live tour. And hopefully, I know we're going to be going some interesting places. I can't wait for San Diego, only 6 months away.
Good Lord. Is it really?
No, it's 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but you're right. Hell with it.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun stuff, fun times. So
and unfortunately, we're not going to be at WonderCon this year.
No, because we're going to be in Richmond.
We're going to be in Richmond, Virginia, for GalaxyCon in Richmond.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my I'm not going to be there, but one of my very best friends in the entire world, since I was a lad, lives there, and he told me he plans to go. And we'll come and say hello. So we'll talk.
That's exciting. So maybe we'll have some stories about Ashley.
Well, maybe you should come. Maybe Ashley can come. Maybe
maybe.
Hopefully, we'll be such a huge hit at Columbus that they will want to bring Ashley.
I love this in Ohio
to Richmond.
I like the blurb you put up that said we were discovering Columbus, which is a nice.
By the way, a good friend of yours is going to be in Columbus. I think she worked for you, Amy Chu, right? Didn't she work for you on DOTA?
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's going to be there. So it's like we got to, you're going to be joining the Treksperts Live tour soon, and then we got to decide if we're going to go to Vegas this year.
Right. Well,
yes,
we should go to Vegas.
We're going to go to Vegas. Of course we are.
I don't know. It's right around when I'm retiring.
You're so money, and you don't even know it.
Maybe we can have my Inglorious Treksperts retirement party there.
Is this you invite the lady on the scooter?
Yeah, right.
Ma'am, if you're out there.
I think there's a hole in the desert I'd like to invite her to.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, okay. But the neon, I've got to go to that neon jungle where they have all the old dead neon signs. Apparently, that's pretty cool.
Sure, let's go watch something that's dead.
Yeah, dead thing.
Why? We go to the Star Trek convention.
Star Trek convention isn't dead. It's just as long as we remember it.
Oh man. Well, guys, I don't know when this is going to air, so I'm not going to talk about the holiday special on Treksperts. It either was fantastic or it's going to be fantastic. I don't know.
Or it's still going on.
Or it's still going
All
on.
three of those things are true at the same time. It's like Schrodinger's holiday special.
Yeah, but this is always good to hang out on Deck 78. And
Indeed.
I think also if you want to suggest some topics for future episodes, I know we want to hit Logan's Run soon. You guys just did a great episode together on RoboCop. We got some more episodes coming up as well, and we're going to be doing a deep dive onto Andor after the season finale. So make sure you join us for that for the season finale of Andor as we talk Star Wars here in the Deck 78.
Unless it's already happened and you've already heard it.
Yeah, that's true. I should commit to what we're covering, because who knows?
In which case, please tell us, what we think.
We've been caught in a time warp.
That's right.
Well, let's do the time warp.
Okay. Well, listen, again, Treksperts Plus is where you can find us.
Trekspertsplus.com.
Well, yeah, I know. But, and of course, we're still on Twitter. So follow us at Inglorious Trek on Twitter. Or if you're not on Twitter anymore, you can go to Instagram or Facebook for Inglorious Treksperts. And we'd love to see you there. And we thank you for joining us for another episode of Deck 78. And thanks for your support of Treksperts Plus. And we'll see you again soon.
And
here
the bar
on
is closed.
Deck 78. The bar is closed. So until then, fire the rockets.
Deck 78 is an exclusive podcast from Treksperts Plus.